Today I'm going to tell you the story of the most expensive humiliation suffered by the Colombian elite. Pablo Escobar was excluded from an exclusive gala at the Campestre Club in Medellin by the most powerful families. This story of media-driven revenge has an ending no one saw coming. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us where in the world you're listening from. The Rejected Invitation. The Campestre Club of Medellin shimmered under the golden lights of the Antiochian sunset as Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, and Jaguars began to fill the main parking lot. It was November 15, 1986, and the Paisa elite was preparing for one of the most exclusive social events of the year, the annual charity gala for the Corazones Unidos Foundation, hosted by the most influential families in Antioquia. From the tinted window of his white Mercedes-Benz 560 SEC, Pablo Escobar watched the procession of luxury cars arriving one after another. At 37, he had amassed a fortune greater than that of many small countries. But that night, he faced something money couldn't buy: acceptance into Colombia's traditional high society. "Don Pablo, are you sure you want to do this?" asked Alvaro from the driver's seat, nervously eyeing the security guards at the club as they scrutinized each vehicle. Maybe it'd be better to wait for a more appropriate occasion. Pablo adjusted the gold cufflinks on his custom-tailored black tuxedo, made by the most exclusive tailor in Bogotá. He wore a pristine white silk shirt, a perfectly knotted black bow tie, and Italian patent leather shoes that gleamed like mirrors. On his wrist, a limited edition Patek. Philippe read 7:15 p.m. "Alvaro, I've donated more money to charity this year than half the families in their combined. It's time they recognize my place in the society." 3 weeks earlier, Pablo had received a formal invitation to the event through his legal company, Inversions LLC. Printed on imported paper with gold lettering, it had brought him a rare kind of satisfaction. At last, after years of building his empire, the doors of Paisa high society seemed to be opening for him. But 2 days later, he received a call that changed everything. "Mr. Escobar," said a polite but cold female voice. "This is Patricia Velez, event coordinator of the Campestre Club. I'm afraid there's been a mistake with the invitation you received for the gala on the 15th. "A mistake?" Pablo asked, feeling something wasn't right. "Unfortunately, the event has reached full capacity. We hope to include you on future occasions." Pablo hung up the phone, fully aware this wasn't a capacity issue. It was personal. His reputation had arrived before he did. But Pablo Escobar wasn't a man who took rejection lightly. "Don Pablo," Alvaro insisted, "if you don't have a valid invitation, they won't let you in. This could get very uncomfortable." Pablo smiled, a smile those who knew him had learned to interpret as dangerous. "Uncomfortable for who? I have just as much right to be at that party as any of those heirs to old fortunes." The Mercedes stopped at the club's main entrance, where a uniformed doorman with white gloves immediately approached. The Campestre Club was a century-old institution with a Spanish colonial facade, manicured gardens, and a level of exclusivity measured not just in money, but in last names and family heritage. "Good evening, sir." The doorman greeted with professional courtesy. "Do you have your invitation?" Pablo stepped out of the vehicle with the studied elegance of a man who had spent time perfecting every aspect of his public image. Despite his modest height, he radiated a natural authority that commanded immediate attention. "I'm here representing Inversions LLC," Pablo said, extending his hand. The doorman carefully reviewed the list, running his finger over names written in elegant calligraphy. "Mr. Escobar, I don't find your name on tonight's guest list." "There must be a mistake," Pablo replied calmly, though his tone implied he was not a man used to hearing no. "I received a formal invitation 3 weeks ago." The doorman, an older man with decades of experience handling delicate situations, maintained his professional composure. "Allow me to check with the event coordinator. Sir, could you wait a moment?" While the doorman spoke over the radio, Pablo looked through the club's illuminated windows. Inside, he saw groups of well-dressed men engaged in animated conversation, women in evening gowns adorned with glittering jewelry, and waiters circulating with trays of French champagne. It was precisely the kind of environment he had dreamed of belonging to since his childhood on the streets of Envigado. "Mr. Escobar," the doorman returned, visibly uncomfortable. They confirmed that there was indeed an initial invitation, but it was later canceled due to space limitations. We apologize for confusion. Pablo felt his blood rise, but outwardly he remained composed. For years, he had worked to earn respect through power and money. Now he was facing something neither could buy: acceptance by the social elite. Space limitations? Pablo repeated, glancing at the main hall, which was clearly not at full capacity. I see. At that moment, a Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit pulled in behind Pablo's car. Out stepped Eduardo Villamizar, heir to one of Antioquia's oldest family fortunes, accompanied by his wife in a Valentino gown and a diamond necklace, likely worth more than the average house. "Eduardo!" called a voice from the entrance, just in time for the opening toast. Pablo watched as Villamizar was welcomed with warm embraces and genuine smiles. No list checks. No questions. His last name was his ticket in. "You know what?" Pablo said to the doorman. "No problem. I completely understand the space limitations." He turned back toward his Mercedes. But before getting in, he added, "Tell Miss Valles that Pablo Escobar thanks her for the clarification and wishes everyone a lovely evening." As the car pulled away from the club, Pablo remained silent, watching the golden lights fade in the rearview mirror. Alvaro, familiar with his boss's moods, didn't dare speak. At last, Pablo broke the silence. "Alvaro, I want you to do something for me early tomorrow." "Whatever you say, Don Pablo. Contact Carlos Bermudez at El Colombiano, Patricia Londano at El Mundo, and German Castro at El Espectador." Alvaro frowned, puzzled. "The journalists?" "The journalists who cover the society pages. I want to meet with them tomorrow at noon." "May I ask why, Don Pablo?" Pablo smiled, but this time it was a different smile, not the dangerous one. The smile of a man with a brilliant idea. "They're going to write a special report on the charitable works I'm funding in Medellin: hospitals, schools, homes for poor families, all documented with photos, testimonials, and exact figures." Alvaro began to understand where this was going. "And when do you want the article published?" "Tomorrow. Front page of Society section. I want all of Medellin to know exactly how much I've donated to charity this year." The Mercedes drove through Medellin's lit-up streets as Pablo mentally fine-tuned his plan. If the traditional elite refused to recognize his place in society, he would remind them who was really making a difference for the less fortunate. "Do you know how much I donated last month to build a hospital in Barrio Pablo Escobar?" he asked. "Not exactly, Don Pablo. 500 million pesos. 500 million? You know how much the Villamizar family donated all last year?" Alvaro shook his head. 50 million. 10 times less than what I donated in 1 month. Pablo looked out at the lights, stretching toward the mountains. Medellin was his city, his territory, his kingdom, and it was time everyone remembered that. Tomorrow, Alvaro, the whole city will know who the true benefactor of the poor in Antioquia is. While old money families gather in exclusive clubs to talk about charity, I am out in the streets building hospitals and schools. The plan was taking shape. It wasn't just about revenge for that night's humiliation. It was something bigger, a redefinition of his public image, a positioning of himself as the true hero of the people, a demonstration that real power didn't come from old surnames, but from concrete actions. And Alvaro, he added as they arrived at his estate in El Poblado, make sure the photographs are spectacular. I want images of families receiving their new homes, children in the schools I built, patients in the hospitals I funded. Anything else, Don Pablo? Pablo paused, thinking for a moment. Yes, I want a photo of me personally handing the keys of a new house to a poor family. And I want the headline to say something like, "The True Face of Generosity in Medellin." As Pablo entered his mansion, he knew the night of rejection at the Campesta Club would be remembered as the moment he decided to change the rules of Medellin's social game. If he couldn't earn their respect by being one of them, he would earn it by being better than them. And tomorrow, the entire city would know exactly who Pablo Escobar was. Not just the richest man in Colombia, but also the most generous. Translation continues in the next part with the media strategy section. Let me know if you'd like that as well. quarter. Patricia Londano leaned forward, clearly interested in the direction the conversation was taking. Mr. Escobar, what exactly is the message you want to convey to our readers? Pablo sat in his chair and placed his hands together on the desk. The message is very simple. True nobility is not measured by the age of one's surname, but by genuine commitment to the well-being of the less fortunate. True elegance is not found in ball gowns, but in the smiles of children who can now go to school. He paused to let his words settle. I want Medellin to know that while some worry about maintaining their social exclusivity, others, like us, are building a better future for everyone. German Castro closed his notebook and looked directly at Pablo. This is a powerful story, Mr. Escobar, but I imagine it's also controversial. Are you prepared for the reactions it may provoke? Pablo smiled with an expression he had perfected over the years. Absolute confidence, mixed with a hint of defiance. German, I've been preparing for this all my life. I grew up being underestimated because of my humble origins. I was rejected by businessmen who later came asking me for loans. And just last night, I was excluded from a party by men whose charitable contributions don't even cover the cost of the bricks for a single house I built for the poor. He stood up and walked toward a framed photograph showing the inauguration of a hospital. The reactions don't worry me. What worries me is that there are families sleeping under tin roofs while the rich argue about the menu for their next gala. Carlos Bermudez closed his notebook and looked at his colleagues. Mr. Escobar, this information is enough for several extensive articles. When would you like us to publish the story? Today, afternoon edition, if possible. The three journalists exchanged glances. Publishing a story of this magnitude on the same day would require completely reorganizing the day's editions. That's a very tight deadline, Patricia noted. Is there a particular reason for the urgency? Pablo returned to his desk and picked up the morning newspaper, where the social section showed elegant photos from the country club gala held the night before. This morning, our readers saw photos of ladies in $1,000 dresses toasting to charity. This afternoon, I want them to see photos of humble families living in homes provided by real charity. He opened the newspaper to the social page and pointed at a particular photo. See this image of Eduardo Villamizar and his wife posing with glasses of French champagne? The cost of that bottle could have fed a poor family for a month. Pablo closed the newspaper with a decisive gesture. I want those same people, when they sit down for dinner tonight, to know exactly who's making a real difference in this city. The journalists began gathering their materials, realizing they had just witnessed the launch of a carefully orchestrated media campaign. Mr. Escobar, said Patricia as she stored her notes, would you be willing to pose for additional photographs today, visiting some of your projects, interacting with beneficiaries? Pablo's eyes lit up. It was exactly what he'd hoped they would ask. Patricia, I have something even better. This afternoon, I'm personally handing over the keys to 10 new houses to families in Barrio Popular. Photographers are welcome to document the entire process. As the journalist headed for the door, Pablo added one last instruction, and make sure the headlines are clear. I don't want euphemisms or journalistic diplomacy. I want to be perfectly clear who is on the side of the poor and who is on the side of exclusive clubs. When the journalist left, Pablo remained in his study, gazing at a map of Medellin marked with his social projects. In just a few hours, the entire city would know that Pablo Escobar wasn't just another rich man. He was the most generous benefactor of the dispossessed, and it was time for everyone to acknowledge it. The spectacle of generosity. At 3 p.m. on November 16th, the Barrio Popular of Medellin buzzed with unusual activity. Cement trucks, construction workers, and a growing crowd of residents gathered around a group of 10 brand-new houses that shone under the Antiochian sun like freshly polished jewels in the middle of urban poverty. Pablo Escobar arrived in a 3-vehicle caravan, his white Mercedes-Benz, followed by a van full of photographers and journalists, and a third car carrying architects and engineers behind the project. He wore a crisp white guayabera, beige linen pants, and brown leather shoes, an outfit chosen to project an image of accessible elegance. The contrast was dramatic and perfectly calculated. While the Paisa elite had posed the night before in ballrooms adorned with crystal chandeliers, Pablo was preparing to be photographed handing over real keys to families who had waited a lifetime for dignified housing. Don Pablo, the families are here, Alvaro informed him, pointing toward a group of 10 families waiting nervously beside the new houses. Pablo observed the families who would be the unwitting protagonists of his media strategy. They were representative of Medellin's urban poor. Fathers with faces weathered by years of hard labor, mothers in humble but impeccably clean dresses, and children with wide eyes glowing with excitement at the prospect of having their own home. Among them was a Morales family. Roberto, a 42-year-old bricklayer who had worked in construction all his adult life. His wife, Carmen, 38, who earned a living washing other people's clothes. And their 4 children, aged 6 to 15, who had spent the last 8 years living in a single-room tin shack. Mr. Escobar, Carmen Morales approached with a mix of gratitude and timidity. "We don't know how to thank you for what you're doing for us." Pablo took the woman's callous hands in his, a gesture the photographers immediately captured from multiple angles. "Senora Carmen, you don't need to thank me. It's my responsibility as a citizen of Medellin to help working families get a chance to thrive." Roberto Morales stepped forward, holding his hat in his hands, clearly moved. "Don Pablo, I worked on building these very houses for the past 3 months. I never imagined one of them would be for my family. And what do you think of the work you did, Roberto?" Roberto smiled with professional pride. "They're solid houses, Don Pablo. Deep foundations, brick walls, fiber cement roofs. They'll last generations." Pablo nodded, satisfied. No expenses had been spared to ensure the homes were of the highest quality. Each house had 2 bedrooms, a living dining room, an equipped kitchen, a full bathroom, and a small backyard. Photographers from Medellin's 3 main newspapers moved around the group like worker bees, capturing every moment from angles that maximize emotional impact. Patricia Londano subtly directed her photographer toward the most powerful shots. Pablo crouching to talk to children, mother's tearful smiles, Father's hard-working hands receiving the keys to their new homes. "Don Pablo," asked Carlos Bermudez as he took notes, "can you explain how these families were selected?" Pablo had anticipated the question and prepared a response that would sound perfect in the press. "Carlos, we work with community leaders to identify the families most in need of dignified housing. We prioritize those with school-aged children, working parents with stable jobs, and those who've shown a commitment to improving their community." He walked over to the Gonzalez family. Marta, a 34-year-old single mother who worked as a domestic employee, and her 3 children. Senora Marta, for example, has been working 2 jobs for the past 5 years to keep her children in school. Her neighbors recommended her because she's always willing to help other families in need. Marta Gonzalez wiped away tears as she held the keys to her new home. "Mr. Escobar, my children will have their own rooms for the first time in their lives. They'll be able to study at a real table instead of the dirt floor of the shack we used to live in." Pablo crouched to meet the eye level of the Gonzalez children, a gesture photographers eagerly captured. "And what will you do in your new house?" he asked. The youngest, a 7-year-old named Andres, answered the honesty only children possess. "We'll have a living room where the whole family can sit together. And my mom says we'll have a kitchen where she can cook without the rain coming in." The group's laughter mixed with the clicking of cameras. German Castro seized a moment to ask a question he knew would generate a powerful response. "Mr. Escobar, what do you feel seeing the joy of these families?" Pablo stood up slowly, taking a moment to observe the genuinely happy faces around him. "German, this is what charity really means. It's not about posing for photographs at elegant galas while debating how much money to allocate to the poor as if they were an abstraction. It's being here, seeing the joyful tears of a mother who knows her children will grow up in a decent home." He walked to the center of the group and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Last night, some people gathered at an exclusive club to talk about helping the needy. Today, we're here delivering real help to real families." The spontaneous applause from the families mixed with the murmurs of approval from the journalists. Pablo continued, knowing that every word would be quoted in the next day's articles. "These 10 houses represent more than just shelter. They represent opportunity. The children who grow up here will have the space to study, to dream, to become the doctors, engineers, and teachers Medellin needs. Roberto Morales timidly raised his hand. Don Pablo, may I say something? Of course, Roberto. Roberto cleared his throat, clearly nervous about speaking in front of journalists. I've worked in construction my whole life. I've built houses for rich families, buildings for important businessmen. But in 20 years of work, I've never seen a boss who made sure the workers building the houses also had the chance to live in one. His words triggered a murmur of agreement among the other families. This man, Roberto continued, pointing at Pablo, not only gave us work building these houses, he gave us the opportunity to live in them. That's something we'll never forget. Photographers worked feverishly, capturing not just images but the emotional authenticity of the moment. These were not staged photos from a typical social event. This was real documentation of social transformation in action. Patricia Londano approached Pablo, while photographers continued their work. Mr. Escobar, is there a specific message you want to convey through these photographs? Pablo looked around, observing the new homes gleaming in the sunlight, families embracing in front of their houses, children running excitedly through rooms that would soon be theirs. Patricia, the message is very simple. While some people measure their social success by the exclusivity of the events they attend, I measure mine by the inclusion of the families I help prosper. He paused to let a group of children run past, their laughter filling the air. Last night at the country club, they talked about the importance of charity. Today, here in Barrio Popular, we are living real charity. As the sun began to set, Pablo walked toward his Mercedes to return home. But before leaving, he turned once more toward the families still exploring their new homes. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, he said, addressing the journalists, the photographs you've taken today will appear in tomorrow's papers. I want readers to compare them with the photos from last night's gala and decide for themselves who is truly committed to the well-being of the less fortunate. As his caravan pulled away from the Barrio Popular, Pablo knew he had perfectly orchestrated the contrast he wanted. In less than 24 hours, all of Medellin would see, side by side, the superficial elegance of the country club and the real generosity of the Barrio Popular. The media war had begun, and Pablo Escobar had just fired the first shot. Pablo crouched beside the Gonzalez children, with the new houses gleaming under the Antiochian sun as a backdrop. The headline, in large bold letters, declared, "The true face of generosity in Medellin." "Alvaro, this is perfect," Pablo murmured, studying every detail of the photograph. But when he opened the full spread, he realized Carlos Bermudez had exceeded all expectations. The report covered 3 full pages. The main page showed a devastating visual contrast. At the top, photos from a Campestre Club gala 2 nights earlier, elegant ladies posing with champagne glasses. At the bottom, images of a humble neighborhood with working-class families receiving the keys to their new homes. The article began with a paragraph that Pablo read twice to savor every word. While Medellin's traditional elite gathered last Friday at the exclusive Campestre Club for their annual charity gala, raising a modest sum of 50 million pesos, Pablo Escobar was quietly investing 10 times that amount to build decent housing for working-class families in a low-income neighborhood. "Have you seen El Mundo?" Alvaro asked, handing over the second newspaper. Patricia Londano had taken a more direct and personal approach. Her article was titled, "Real Charity, When Actions Speak Louder Than Galas." The front page featured a full-page photograph of Roberto Morales receiving the keys to his new home, his face showing a genuine expression of gratitude, the kind no art director could ever stage. But it was on the second page that Patricia delivered her masterstroke. She had created a comparison table titled, "Two Ways of Understanding Charity." Pablo smiled as he read the numbers. The chart turned his argument into undeniable math. "And here's El Espectador," said Alvaro, handing over the third paper. German Castro had taken the most provocative angle of all. His headline was impossible to ignore. Who truly represents Antiochian society? The article began with a bold question that would echo across the city. What says more about a society's values? Excluding its most effective social benefactor from a charity gala, or building hospitals and schools while others debate menus and decorations? Pablo leaned back in his chair, satisfied. The three journalists had perfectly grasped the narrative he wanted to push. But the best part was yet to come. Alvaro turned on the radio and tuned into Medellin's most listened-to morning show, Buenos Dias Paisa with Alberto Casas. This morning, the entire city is talking about the revelations published in our major newspapers regarding Pablo Escobar's philanthropic activities, began Casas, in his signature voice. We have several callers on the line, ready to share their opinions. The first call came from a woman who identified herself as Maria Elena, a schoolteacher. Alberto, I work at one of the schools Mr. Escobar built in the Moravian neighborhood. Before, our children studied in a tin shack without windows. Now, they have spacious classrooms, a library, and a school cafeteria. While some worry about who gets invited to parties, this man is changing real lives. Pablo leaned in, absorbing every word. The second call came from a man who introduced himself as a taxi driver. Alberto, I've been driving a taxi in this city for 30 years. I've taken plenty of rich folks to their fancy galas. But yesterday, I drove a lady from a working-class neighborhood who cried tears of joy because she was going to see the new home she'd been given. That felt more elegant to me than any gala. Don Pablo, have you seen this? Alvaro handed him a sheet with handwritten numbers. What is it? Today's newspaper sales figures. El Colombiano sold out before 7 a.m. El Mundo is already on its second reprint, and El Espectador is reporting its highest sales of the year. Pablo smiled. The impact was greater than he had anticipated. The phone rang, and Alvaro picked up. Escobar residence. Who's calling? One moment, please. Don Pablo. It's Father Hernandez from San Jose Church. Pablo took the call. Father Hernandez, how are you? Don Pablo. I'm calling because my entire congregation is discussing today's articles. Many of my parishioners have benefited from your social projects, and they wanted you to know how much they appreciate not only your generosity, but also your decision to make your work public. For so long, good deeds have gone unnoticed while social appearances have taken center stage. Thank you, Father. That was precisely my point. Also, Don Pablo, would it be possible to meet this week? I have a few ideas for additional projects that could help our community. After hanging up, Pablo walked toward the window. From there, he could see Medellin waking up. Buses packed with workers, street vendors setting up their stands, mothers walking their children to school. His city, his people. Alvaro, what did the other messages say? Alvaro consulted a notebook where he'd been jotting down morning calls. So far, we received 53 calls. 47 were supportive and congratulatory. 3 were from national journalists requesting interviews. 3 were from business leaders interested in your social projects. And the 3 negative ones? 2 were anonymous, probably linked to families from the gala. 1 questioned the source of funding for your initiatives. Pablo nodded. He had expected some backlash, but the ratio was even better than he'd hoped. At 9 a.m., Alvaro entered the study again, visibly surprised. Don Pablo, something interesting just arrived. What is it? A formal invitation from a union club, signed by its president. They're inviting you to be the keynote speaker at their upcoming gala dinner next month. Pablo took the elegant invitation, printed on imported paper. The union club was even more exclusive than the country club. And there's more. An invitation from the Medellin Chamber of Commerce to speak on a panel about corporate social responsibility, and one from the Pontifical Bolivarian University to give a lecture on strategic philanthropy. Pablo leaned back in his chair, processing the irony. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from being excluded from a social event to being invited as a keynote speaker at multiple prestigious venues. You know what's most interesting about all this, Alvaro? What, Don Pablo? Yesterday, I thought my goal was revenge. I wanted to humiliate those who humiliated me. But what I really achieved was something far more valuable. He stood up and walked to a map of Medellin marked with his social projects. I changed the conversation about what success really means in this city. Success used to be measured by your last name or the exclusivity of the events you attended. Now, the whole city is talking about measuring success by the real impact you have on people's lives. Alvaro nodded, understanding the depth of what had happened. Don Pablo, are you going to accept the invitations? Pablo smiled and picked up the envelopes from his desk. All of them. But not because I need their approval. I'll accept them because now I have a platform to keep spreading this message. True nobility is earned through action, not ancestry. He opened his personal archive and pulled out a list of future projects he'd been planning. And Alvaro, I want you to schedule a meeting with the architects for next week. It's time to announce our next project, a full pediatric hospital in Comuna 13. When should we make the public announcement? Pablo looked at the newspapers scattered across his desk, their front pages filled with his photos. Next week. But this time, we won't wait to be excluded from some event to prove our social commitment. This time, we'll be the ones setting the tone. As Medellin began its day on November 17th, the entire city was buzzing about the morning headlines. In offices, schools, taxis, and cafes, the conversation was the same. Pablo Escobar had proven that real power lies not in the ability to exclude, but in the ability to include. And in a study in El Poblado, surrounded by newspapers featuring his image on the front page, Pablo knew he had accomplished something that money alone could never buy. He had redefined the terms of success, generosity, and social leadership in Medellin. The humiliation of the country club had transformed into the greatest media triumph of his career, and it was only the beginning.